Welcome to English Stories Journey. Listen, relax, and grow your English with every story.
The Morgan family had moved into the small countryside village only a few days ago. The stone house they had rented was old but sturdy, its walls covered in ivy, its windows tall and narrow, and its garden dominated by a solitary, ancient oak tree. The villagers had welcomed them politely, though with the reserved curiosity typical of a place where everyone knew everyone else's history. Emily, 15, had been quietly exploring the yard that evening. She liked the way the moonlight struck the branches of the oak, casting shadows that twisted and flickered across the damp grass. It was serene, almost enchanting. But there was also a strange stillness that made her feel as though the garden were holding its breath. By midnight, Emily lay awake in her room. The faint light of the moon filtered through the curtains, painting silver lines across her bedroom floor. She thought she heard a soft rustling outside. At first, she tried to dismiss it, leaves brushing against the wall, the wind in the branches. But then she noticed something she could not explain. A shape stood beneath the oak tree. Emily sat up abruptly. Her pulse quickened. The shape was white, glowing faintly in the moonlight, upright and perfectly still. She could see the folds of the fabric, delicate and flowing, as though the dress had been carefully arranged for display. But there was no hanger, no stand, no figure inside it, yet it maintained its shape with an eerie precision. "Mom! Dad!" she whispered, her voice trembling. Her father, Edward, was reading a book at the kitchen table, and her mother, Claire, sat nearby with a cup of tea. Both looked up at her voice. Emily ran to the door, flinging it open. The cold night air washed over her as she stepped onto the porch. "There's a dress in the garden," she said, pointing. It's standing under the oak tree, by itself." Her mother's eyes widened, but she tried to sound calm. "Emily, are you sure? Maybe it's a reflection or a trick of the moonlight." Emily shook her head, unable to tear her eyes away. "No, it's real. Look." Her father grabbed a flashlight and followed her out. The beam of light cut through the night, illuminating the oak tree and the glowing white dress beneath it. The fabric shimmered in the beam, as though reflecting its own light, and Emily could see intricate lace along the sleeves and neckline. The hem of the skirt hovered slightly above the grass, almost as if it were floating. Her father frowned. "I don't understand. There's nothing supporting it. No wires, no mannequin, nothing." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She took a hesitant step forward. The dress remained motionless, yet it seemed to hold a presence, an almost imperceptible energy that pressed on her senses. The air near the tree felt heavier, cooler than the rest of the garden, and even though the night was calm, the branches of the oak rustled above them. Her mother hugged herself. "It's strange, but maybe some kids in the village are playing a prank." Edward shook his head, though his expression betrayed unease. "At midnight, out here, in this weather? That seems unlikely." Emily's heart pounded. She could feel it in her chest, fast and insistent. "It's moving," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant the dress itself or the way the shadows beneath it seemed to shift. Her father crouched down, shining the flashlight over the grass and soil around the oak. No footprints, not a mark anywhere. The dew is undisturbed. Her mother swallowed. "Then what is it?" Edward straightened and ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know, but it's gone now." Emily's eyes widened. "It's gone. It hasn't moved yet." She looked toward the tree. The dress had vanished. Not toppled, not collapsed, simply gone, as though it had never been there. The grass remained pristine, the soil firm, the garden gate locked. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence. The only sound was the distant hoot of an owl and the faint rustle of the oak's leaves. Her father sighed. Well, either someone is very clever, or we've just seen a very realistic prank. There's nothing else we can do. It's gone now. Let's not dwell on it. Emily shivered. The moonlight no longer seemed comforting. It was pale and cold, casting long, trembling shadows across the garden. She wanted to ask questions, to investigate, to find out where the dress had gone, but the family had already decided. Her father's voice, calm but firm, carried authority. It was a prank. Her mother added softly, "Let's just get back inside. We can't see anything now, and there's nothing to prove." Reluctantly, Emily followed them back into the house. She stole one last glance at the oak tree, its twisted branches silhouetted against the night sky, and wondered what they had truly seen. There had been no one there, no evidence of any prank, and yet the dress had appeared, glowing faintly, as if it had been waiting for her. Back inside, the family tried to carry on as if nothing had happened. Edward returned to his chair and his book, Claire sipped her tea with a faintly forced smile, and Emily went to her room, tossing and turning as the image of the dress lingered in her mind. She stared out the window long after the lights in the house had dimmed, thinking of the folds of fabric, the way the moonlight had caught the lace, and the strange, almost imperceptible shimmer that had made the dress seem alive. For a moment, she imagined it moving, stepping closer, its invisible presence brushing against the garden air. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Eventually, exhaustion overcame her fear, and she drifted into a fitful sleep. In the quiet darkness of the house, the garden lay still, the oak tree casting long, silent shadows beneath the soft glow of the moon. Whatever had appeared there that night was gone, leaving only the memory of its impossible presence. By morning, the sun spilled soft gold across the garden. The dew sparkled on the grass, undisturbed. The gate remained firmly closed. The tree stood alone, its branches motionless. The dress had vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. No fabric, no footprints, nothing at all. Emily walked to the window, still shaken, but her parents' calm reassurances echoed in her ears. They had agreed. It must have been a prank. Perhaps some children had sneaked into the garden, somehow unseen, leaving the dress in its place and taking it away before dawn. Or perhaps it had been her imagination, fueled by the unfamiliar night sounds and shadows. She sighed, trying to push the memory from her mind. The village seemed quiet and ordinary in the daylight. Children playing, birds singing, neighbors tending their gardens. Everything looked normal. Nothing hinted at the strange, impossible sight of the wedding dress beneath the oak tree. And so the family continued their mourning, carrying on as if nothing had happened. Emily glanced one last time toward the oak tree before leaving for breakfast. The garden appeared peaceful, normal, untouched by any prank. Yet deep down, a tiny, persistent part of her could not shake the image of that glowing dress, perfectly upright, its presence impossible to explain. For now, they had no proof, and the dress was gone. The Morgans made a quiet decision. Whatever had happened the night before, it was nothing more than a prank. The mystery would remain for another time, or perhaps fade entirely. Emily turned from the window, trying to convince herself that her family was right. It had to be. The dress was gone, the garden calm, and the morning sun warm. Whatever magic or mischief had been at work, it was over, and they could go about their lives untouched by the impossible apparition that had haunted their garden under the moonlight. But as she moved away from the window, a faint chill lingered in the air, and the memory of the glowing dress refused to fade completely from her mind. The evening sky hung low over the village, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down upon the rooftops and the quiet lanes. Rain had fallen earlier in the day, leaving the grass slick and glistening in the dim light of dusk. Emily could feel the tension in the air as she moved through the house, each creak of the floorboards magnified in the silence. After the events of the previous night, she couldn't stop thinking about the dress. She tried to convince herself it had been a prank, that someone had somehow set up the impossible sight of the glowing gown. But deep down, Emily knew that what she had seen could not be explained by mere trickery. Dinner had passed quietly. Her father, Edward, tried to joke, asking if she had seen any more dresses in the garden today. But there was a tightness in his voice, a note of unease that Emily could not miss. Her mother, Claire, kept busy in the kitchen, washing dishes and avoiding her daughter's gaze, though the faint shadow under her eyes betrayed her worry. Night fell, and with it a sense of inevitability. Emily lay awake, listening to the soft wind tapping against the windows. The rain had stopped, leaving the grass damp and glimmering under the silver light of the rising moon. She could hear the familiar sound of the dog, a large, shaggy creature named Rufus, snoring in the living room below. He had been restless earlier, whining at the door and refusing to go outside when called. Emily had set up her phone on the windowsill, its camera trained on the oak tree. She was determined this time to see the garden clearly, to capture whatever might appear and prove to herself that she was not imagining things. She pressed record, her fingers trembling slightly, and turned off the bedside lamp, plunging her room into darkness. Hours passed. The wind whispered through the cracks in the old windows, and the branches of the oak tree creaked as if stretching. Emily's eyes grew heavy, but she resisted sleep, staring at the faint shadows that the moon cast across the grass. Then she saw it. The dress returned. This time, it was not pristine. Its white fabric was streaked with mud, dark patches staining the delicate lace and flowing skirt. It looked as though it had been dragged along the damp ground, yet no footprints surrounded it, no traces marked its path. The dress stood up upright, swaying ever so slightly as if moved by an unseen hand. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the soft rustling of the fabric, though there was no breeze to stir it. Then, faintly at first, a sound reached her ears, a gentle melody, haunting and distant, like the soft strains of a wedding march. The music seemed to come from nowhere, yet it echoed clearly in the garden, reverberating through the air as though the night itself were alive. Her heart pounded. She pressed her face closer to the window, straining to see. And then she noticed it, a shadow, darker than the night itself, standing beside the dress. It was a woman, tall and thin, holding what appeared to be a bouquet of wilted flowers. Her face was obscured, but Emily felt the weight of her gaze, as if the shadow knew she was watching.
Mom? Dad? Emily whispered, barely audible. It's back. And there's someone there. Her parents stirred in their sleep. She shook her shoulder lightly. Mom! Dad! Wake up! There's something in the garden! Claire stirred, her eyes opening sleepily. Emily, what is it? Look! The dress! There's a woman! A shadow! Emily pointed toward the oak tree, her hands trembling. Edward rubbed his eyes and leaned closer to the window, shining a flashlight toward the garden. The light fell across the grass, illuminating the oak tree and the spot where the dress should have been, but when it landed on that space, there was nothing. The mud-streaked dress had vanished, the shadow, the bouquet, gone. Only the damp grass glistened in the moonlight. It's gone again, Edward muttered, his voice low. How is that even possible? Emily's mother wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Maybe it really is just a prank, she suggested, though her voice betrayed the tension in her chest. Kids, perhaps. Someone leaving a dress here again. It could be. Emily shook her head. It's not a prank. It's something else. The dress, the music, the shadow, it's real. Her father frowned, though he did not argue. We've seen the dress appear before, yes, he said slowly. But there's no evidence this time. No footprints, no marks, no one around. Whatever it is, it's gone now, just like last night. We can't chase shadows. Emily's heart pounded in her ears. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window, trying to convince herself it was over. Yet a part of her refused to let go of the feeling that something was waiting in the garden, just beyond her sight. The dog, Rufus, began growling softly, low in his throat. Emily glanced down. He refused to move from the corner of the room, ears perked, hackles raised. When Edward tried to coax him outside to check the yard, Rufus barked sharply and retreated, clearly unwilling to approach the oak tree. Even the family pet, so brave during storms and loud noises, seemed aware of a presence invisible to the human eye. The family gathered near the window, peering cautiously. Emily noticed deep scratches along the wooden gate, fresh and jagged, as if something had clawed its way through. There was no mud, no blood, just the raw marks in the wood, a testament to some force trying to enter or escape. This is getting stranger by the minute, Edward muttered. He crouched, inspecting the marks. No one could have done this, not without leaving other evidence. It's unnerving. Emily's mother rubbed her arms, shivering. We can't see it now, and it's gone again. Perhaps we should just let it be, for tonight anyway. Emily felt frustration rising, mingled with fear. She wanted to go outside, to investigate the scratches, to see if she could find some proof. But the dress, the shadow, and the music had vanished. There was nothing to track, nothing to examine. Her father finally straightened, running a hand over his face. I think, for now, we have to assume it's a prank. Someone is clever, or perhaps we're imagining things. But there's nothing we can do tonight. The dress is gone, and there's no sign of anyone in the garden. Let's get some sleep and deal with it in the morning. Emily's mother nodded. Yes, it's gone now. There's nothing to check. We'll think about it later. Reluctantly, Emily climbed back into her bed, wrapping herself in blankets. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, to convince herself her father was right. It must be a prank, she reasoned. There was no other explanation, though a tiny, stubborn part of her mind whispered that it wasn't that simple.
She stared at the window, watching the moonlight glint off the oak tree. The branches swayed slightly in the breeze, casting long shadows across the garden. Emily felt as though the tree itself was observing her, waiting, and somewhere beneath its branches, the dress, pale, flowing, and impossibly alive, had been and would be again. The night passed slowly. Each creak of the house and whisper of the wind make Emily startle. Rufus refused to move from the corner of the room, growling every time the shadows shifted in the moonlight. By the time the first light of dawn spilled over the garden, the dress and the shadow were gone entirely, leaving nothing but wet grass, the ancient oak, and the deep scratches along the gate. Over breakfast, the family spoke cautiously. Edward tried to joke, asking if Emily had seen any more phantom dresses last night, and Claire smiled faintly, though uneasily. The marks on the gate were noted, but no one suggested anything more than a clever prank or perhaps an overactive imagination. Emily wanted to argue, to insist that the shadow had been real, that the music and the dress had moved of their own accord. But when she glanced at her parents' calm faces, she hesitated. They had decided. The dress was gone, the garden quiet, and there was no one to investigate. For the moment, it had to be a prank. She nodded silently, swallowing her frustration. For tonight at least, the mystery would wait. The scratches would fade in her mind, the shadow would dissolve into memory, and the music would vanish from her ears. Yet, even as she tried to push it from her thoughts, she felt a chill along her spine, a whisper of certainty that what had appeared in the garden was not human, not prank, and not gone forever. It would return, and when it did, she would be ready. Or so she told herself, though a part of her feared she never truly could be.
Emily could not stop thinking about the dress. It haunted her at school, during meals, even in the few moments when she tried to lose herself in a book. She was only 16, and yet she felt far older these days. Older because she had seen something that no one else seemed to take seriously. The dress was not just fabric. She was certain of it now. It carried weight, presence, and something darker. Her parents had dismissed it as a prank, though she noticed how her father had quietly reinforced the lock on the garden gate that morning. He hadn't admitted it out loud, but he was uneasy too. Her mother laughed it off, telling Emily she was letting her imagination run away with her. But imagination didn't explain the sound of music at night, or the way the dog whimpered, stiff-legged, refusing to go near the oak tree. Emily decided she needed answers, not from her parents, not from her peers, but from someone who had lived in the village long enough to know its stories. That afternoon, she walked up the narrow lane to the oldest house at the end of the road, its thatched roof sagging in the middle, its garden grown wild with lavender and foxglove. Mrs. Hargreaves lived there, a woman well into her 70s, whose sharp eyes missed nothing, though her hands shook when she poured tea. Emily knocked lightly. The door creaked open almost at once, as if Mrs. Hargreaves had been waiting. "Ah," the old woman said, peering out, "you're one of the new Morgans, aren't you?" "Yes," Emily replied nervously. "I'm Emily. I wanted to ask you about something strange." Mrs. Hargreaves tilted her head. "Strange, is it? Then you'd better come inside." The house smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke.
Everywhere Emily looked, there were faded photographs in oval frames, lace doilies and stacks of books whose spines cracked with age. She sat down at the kitchen table while Mrs. Hargreaves poured 2 cups of strong black tea. "So, what's troubling you?" the old woman asked, sliding a cup across. Emily hesitated. "It's in our garden, by the oak tree. I saw a dress." She expected a laugh, a dismissal. Instead, Mrs. Hargreaves' hands froze in mid-air, the teaspoon clinking against the cup. "A dress, you say?" Emily nodded. "A wedding dress, white, standing upright, all on its own. At first I thought it was just a joke, but it's come back, dirtier this time. And there was music, wedding music, and maybe even a shadow." Mrs. Hargreaves' expression softened, though her eyes grew troubled. She leaned back in her chair, sighing deeply. "That'll be Clara Bell's dress," she murmured. Emily leaned forward. "Clara Bell?" "Yes, the bride who never made it to her altar, 20 years ago, right here in this village." Emily's heart thudded. What happened?
Mrs. Hargreaves stirred her tea slowly, as if buying time. "I remember it like it was yesterday. Clara was only 22, full of life, beautiful as summer itself. Her fiancé, Thomas Whitaker, came from one of the farming families. They were set to marry in the old church at the edge of town. Everyone knew about it. The whole village was invited. But on the very night of her wedding—" The old woman shook her head. "She disappeared." Emily shivered. "Just like that? Gone?" Mrs. Hargreaves' voice lowered. "Her dress was never found, and neither was she. The groom, Thomas, was discovered the next morning drowned in the river. Whether it was accident, despair, or something darker, no one ever knew. Some said Clara had run away. Others whispered that Thomas killed her before taking his own life. But there was no proof, and her family, they refused to speak of it. They moved away within a year." Emily sat in silence, gripping the edge of her chair. A bride vanished, a groom dead, a wedding turned into a funeral. 20 years ago, Mrs. Hargreaves repeated, more to herself than to Emily. But people still talk. They say Clara lingers, unable to rest because her vow was left unfinished, and that her dress, the one she never walked down the aisle in, sometimes appears where she was last seen, under the oak tree. Emily's stomach twisted. "Our oak tree?" The old woman nodded. "That land used to belong to Clara's family. Your house is built where the Bells once lived." Emily's mind reeled. It wasn't some silly prank by local kids. The dress had a history, a story soaked in tragedy. Mrs. Hargreaves leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's more, though. Rumors. Some claimed Clara was carrying a child when she vanished. A scandal, if true. The Bells were proud people. They would have hidden it at any cost. Others believe Thomas found out and couldn't bear the shame. Still others insist Clara's family silenced her to keep the whispers from spreading. No one knows the truth, and with no body, no dress, nothing to bury, the villagers were left with only their suspicions." Emily swallowed hard. Do you believe she's still here?" Mrs. Hargreaves met her gaze with startling clarity. "Child, I believe some vows bind tighter than death. A bride robbed of her altar, a soul cheated of its ending, it does not rest easy." The kitchen seemed colder now. The ticking clock on the wall was loud in the silence. Emily tried to speak but found her throat dry. She took a sip of tea, though it had gone bitter. Finally she managed. "And the scratches on our gate? Could that be—" "Her trying to return," Mrs. Hargreaves interrupted softly. "Or perhaps something else, something darker, following in her wake. For where there is tragedy, there is often anger. Spirits don't always return as they were in life." Emily's pulse quickened.
She thought of the shadow she had seen, tall, dark, bouquet in hand, melting away at her touch. Clarabelle, or something that wore Clara's shape? Mrs. Hargraves must have noticed her fear, for she reached across the table and patted Emily's hand with surprising strength. "You must be careful," she said firmly. "Don't go near that tree after dark. Don't call out to her. And whatever you do, don't accept anything she might try to give you." Emily blinked. "Give me?" The old woman's eyes narrowed. "The dead sometimes offer tokens, flowers, rings, pieces of their unfinished lives. To accept them is to accept their fate." Emily shuddered. By the time she left Mrs. Hargrave's cottage, the sun was already setting, painting the sky a bruised purple. The lane seemed longer on the way back, shadows stretching, hedgerows whispering with the wind. She clutched the straps of her backpack tightly, replaying every word in her mind. A bride, a vanished body, a drowned groom. 20 years was not long enough to bury such a story, not when the dress had found its way back, dirtied by earth, glowing in the moonlight as though it had walked through the soil itself. When she reached home, Emily saw the oak tree looming at the back of the garden, its branches bare claws against the dusk. She couldn't take her eyes off the patch of ground beneath it, half expecting the dress to be standing there already, waiting. Her parents were in the kitchen, talking, the sound of cutlery clinking on plates. Ordinary life carried on, unaware, or perhaps pretending not to notice. Emily, however, knew different now. She whispered under her breath, as if testing the name. Clara. The wind shifted suddenly, cool against her skin. For a moment she thought she heard something, faint, distant, like the echo of an organ playing the opening notes of a wedding march. Emily hurried inside, shutting the door firmly behind her. But in her chest, the questions burned hotter than ever. Who killed Clarabelle? Why had she returned? And what, if anything, did the Morgans have to do with her unfinished vow? The storm had rolled away by evening, leaving the village drenched and the Morgan garden slick with rain. Emily sat curled on her bed, unable to focus on the book in her lap. Every creak of the old house, every shift of the wind against the shutters made her tense. She had been avoiding looking at the oak tree, but her curiosity gnawed at her. She slid off the bed and moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The garden was silver in the moonlight, puddles shimmering between the blades of wet grass. For a moment, she thought the oak tree stood empty. Relief loosened her chest. And then she saw it. The dress. It was there again, this time soaked, the fabric heavy and clinging, yet somehow still upright. The veil dangled limply, plastered against where a face should have been. Emily bit her lip hard to keep from crying out. She reached for her phone, wanting to capture it this time, but her hand froze halfway. Because something was wrong. The dress wasn't standing as before. It was facing the house. Emily stepped back instinctively. Her heel bumped her desk, rattling a glass of water. She stared, unable to look away. And then she heard it. Soft, deliberate tapping against the glass. She gasped and looked down. Beneath her window, standing in the mud, was a woman-shaped shadow. The soaked dress clung to her, and though her face was hidden by the wet veil, Emily saw the faintest gleam of eyes. "Mom," Emily whispered, too afraid to shout. The figure raised a hand, pale and dripping, and pressed it against the window pane. Emily's breath fogged the glass as she whispered, "Please no." The moment her words left her lips, the lights in her room flickered violently. When they steadied again, the garden was empty. No dress, no figure, only the swaying oak. Emily stumbled back, her chest heaving. The next morning at breakfast, she tried to explain. It wasn't just the dress, she insisted, clutching her mug of tea. I saw her, a woman. She was looking up at me. Her mother frowned. Emily, sweetheart, you've hardly been sleeping. You're spooking yourself. I'm not, Emily snapped, louder than she intended. She tapped at my window. I heard it. I swear I did. Her father lowered his newspaper. Enough, Emily. You'll make yourself sick dwelling on this nonsense. No more midnight vigils at the window, understood? But Emily knew what she'd seen.
That afternoon, while her parents argued softly in the kitchen, Emily went out. She needed answers, and there was only one person in the village who seemed willing to talk: Mrs. Hargreaves. The old woman was tending her roses when Emily arrived. She straightened slowly, her lined face tightening when she saw the girl's expression. "You've seen her," Mrs. Hargreaves said before Emily could speak. Emily froze. "How do you know?" The woman's eyes softened with something between pity and fear. "Because once you look too long at the dress, she looks back. That's how it begins." Emily swallowed. "Who is she really? I know she's Clarabelle, but why does she keep showing herself? What does she want from me?" Mrs. Hargreaves set down her trowel, leaning heavily on her knees. She lowered her voice as if the garden itself might be listening. "People say Clara was betrayed, but no one agrees by whom. Some swear it was Thomas, others say she ran away. But I remember more than most. I remember whispers about another man." Emily blinked. "Another man?" The old woman nodded, her face shadowed. "Someone no one ever named out loud. I was younger then, but I remember hearing Clara's sister shouting after the funeral. It wasn't Thomas, it was him." Of course, no one asked who him was. They hushed her, said she was out of her mind with grief. But I tell you, child, there was more than two souls tangled in that night. Clara had a secret admirer, maybe a lover, maybe just someone who wanted her badly enough to do terrible things. Emily felt her stomach tighten. "And you think he killed her?" Mrs. Hargreaves' lips pressed into a thin line. "Killed them both, perhaps. Thomas was found in the river, yes, but he looked like a man who had been chased, like he'd tried to run." The air between them grew heavier, colder. Emily rubbed her arms. "Why didn't anyone ever say this before?" "Because this village doesn't like loose tongues, and because no one wanted to believe a stranger might have been walking among us, someone capable of that sort of evil. Easier to blame Thomas or say Clara ran away." Emily hesitated. "Do you know who he was?" Mrs. Hargreaves shook her head, though her eyes flicked away for a moment, as if she was hiding something. "No one ever saw his face, only that he was tall, dark-haired, and often lurking by the churchyard in the weeks before Clara's wedding. Some said he wasn't even from here, just drifted in, then vanished when she did." Her voice dropped even lower. "But I've always believed Clara's spirit knows who he was. That's why she won't rest. She's waiting for him, or someone like him, to see her again." A chill trickled down Emily's spine. She hugged herself. "Why me? Why is she showing herself to me?" Mrs. Hargreaves studied her carefully, her eyes narrowing in a way that made Emily uncomfortable. "Maybe she sees something familiar in you, child. Maybe she reminds her of someone she once knew. That's not always a blessing." Emily's voice cracked. "You mean she thinks I'm her?" The old woman didn't answer. She picked up her trowel again and bent toward her roses, signaling the conversation was over. "Go home before the dark comes, and whatever you do, don't look her in the eyes." That night Emily tried.
She locked her window, shut the curtains tight, and buried herself under the blankets. But sometime after midnight, faint music stirred her awake. It was distant, lilting, like a wedding march played on an old music box. The sound made the hair on her arms rise. Slowly, she slid from bed and crept to the window. With trembling fingers, she pulled the curtains aside just a little. The garden lay still in the moonlight, and there, beneath the oak, the dress stood again. But this time, it wasn't alone. Beside it stood the shadow of a woman holding a bouquet of wilted flowers. Emily's mouth went dry. She could see the faint outline of a veil, the curve of shoulders, the sway of the bouquet. The shadow seemed to hum with the same music she heard. Emily's phone was on her nightstand. She fumbled for it, her hands shaking, and raised it to record. She focused the lens on the oak tree, and just as she did, the figure turned its head toward her. The veil fluttered, though no wind blew. The bouquet dropped soundlessly to the ground. The woman lifted her face toward Emily's window. Emily screamed and stumbled back, nearly dropping the phone. Her lamp flickered, and in the second of darkness, she heard the bouquet being dragged across the grass, as though pulled by unseen fingers. When the light steadied, the garden was empty again. She replayed the footage in her phone. The dress was there, faint and glowing, and just before the image cut out, two pale hands emerged from the sleeves. The next morning, Emily showed the video to her parents, but on her phone, the dress didn't glow. There was no shadow of a woman, no bouquet, no hands, only the oak tree swaying under the moon. Her father rubbed his temples. "Enough, Emily. This obsession stops now." Her mother tried to sound soothing. "Maybe it's time we get someone to bless the house. A priest or—" "No," Emily's voice cracked. "You don't understand. She's here, she's watching me, and she's not going to stop." The room fell silent. Even the dog, usually restless, lay stiff in his corner, ears flat against his head. And then, from outside, came the sound none of them could mistake. Tap, 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 against Emily's window, in the bright light of morning. The village had grown quieter around the Morgans, as though people had decided that the family was best kept at arm's length. Whispers followed Emily when she walked through the lanes, but they died the moment she turned her head. The story of Clarabelle wasn't forgotten, it was avoided, like a wound that still hadn't healed. Emily had stopped trying to press Mrs. Hargraves for answers. The old woman had said too much already, and Emily sensed she had reached the limit of what the past would allow. Still, Mrs. Hargrave's words clung to her like burrs. "It wasn't just Thomas, my dear. There was someone else." Someone else. Another man. The thought turned in Emily's mind until it became sharper than the truth she already knew. Thomas drowned, Clara vanished, and a wedding dress wandered into her garden every night. But if there was a missing piece, it was that nameless figure, someone who might have wanted them both gone. The fifth night arrived under a swollen moon. Clouds moved like torn sails across the sky, and the air carried the restless scent of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Emily sat at her window again, unable to sleep, her eyes fixed on the oak tree. When the dress appeared, it looked worse than before, mud dragging the hem, the lace frayed and torn in places, as though it had been pulled over sharp stones. It swayed in the stillness, heavy with damp, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw the faint shimmer of a veil covering a head that wasn't really there. She shivered. Then she saw something else, on the bark of the oak itself, just beside where the dress brushed against it. Scratches, not random lines, but marks cut deliberately into the wood. Her curiosity overpowered her fear. Slipping into her coat, she crept out into the night. The grass felt slick beneath her shoes, though no dew had formed yet, and every step seemed louder than it should have been. The dog whined softly from behind the back door, but didn't bark, as if warning her without daring to break the silence. At the base of the oak, she lifted her lantern. The scratches were letters, or rather, the start of letters. She leaned closer. E. Her breath hitched. Just one letter, cut deep and left unfinished. The line was harsh, angry, as though whoever had carved it had done so in haste or rage, then stopped suddenly. Emily frowned. A name, perhaps? But whose? The villagers she'd heard of, Clara and Thomas, didn't begin with E. Neither did Mrs. Hargraves, nor anyone Emily could think of from the fragments of stories she'd pieced together. The single letter gave her no answers, only more questions. She reached out and brushed her fingers over the groove. The wood felt cold, damp, not just with night air, but with something else, as if the mark itself bled chill into her skin. A sudden gust rustled through the branches above her, though the night had been still seconds earlier. She stepped back, the lantern trembling in her hand. The dress shifted. It turned, almost imperceptibly, as if the invisible bride wearing it had moved to look at her. For the first time, she felt that the thing wasn't just appearing in the garden, it was aware of her, watching her. Her chest tightened. She stumbled back toward the house, never once looking away until she was safely inside, the bolt drawn across the door. That night, she dreamed of the river. She stood on its bank, the water black and sluggish under a waning moon. A figure, in a ruined wedding dress, stood across from her, veil streaming in the wind. Slowly, the bride lifted her head, but where a face should have been, there was only darkness. From that darkness came a voice, broken and wet, as though rising through water. You shouldn't have looked. Emily woke gasping, sweat cooling her skin despite the chill in her room. And then she saw it. The wedding dress was there again. Not in the garden, not by the oak tree, but inside her room, draped carefully across the chair at her desk. Mud smeared the fabric, and the air carried the sharp, earthy smell of riverweed. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth to stop a scream. She forced herself to approach, every step an effort against the dread coiling in her chest. On the sleeve, half hidden in the folds, she noticed something new. A smear of brown red that could only be blood. And below it, faint and almost faded into the fabric, were embroidered initials. Not CB, not Clara Bell. Something else entirely. Letters she didn't recognize. The following morning, Emily wandered the village in a haze, desperate for clues. Most people brushed her off with muttered warnings, but an old groundskeeper, Mr. Powell, gave her a look that stayed with her. They found Thomas in the river, yes, he told her when she pressed, but don't believe what they wrote in their reports. He didn't just drown. He was struck first. I saw the wound on his head, though the coroner dismissed it as an accident. Looked more like a blow, heavy, deliberate. And Clara? Emily asked. He shook his head. Never found. Some say she ran, some say she drowned, but me, I think she was taken by the same hand that struck Thomas down. Emily's skin prickled. Do you know whose hand? Mr. Powell's expression hardened. His eyes darted away, and he shook his head. Best you don't ask, girl. There are shadows in this village that don't take kindly to being spoken of. Leave it there. That evening, as dusk settled, Emily found herself back at the oak tree. Her eyes drifted once more to the carved E. It looked even deeper in the fading light, as if it had been waiting for her all along. She touched it again, whispering softly to herself. Who are you? A whisper brushed the back of her neck.
It wasn't Thomas. She spun around. The garden was empty, but when she turned back, the dress swayed, though no wind stirred, and for an instant, standing beside it, she thought she saw a shadow darker than the night itself, watching her. The storm rolled in heavy and violent, the kind of storm that seemed to shake the world from its foundations. The Morgans' house rattled as the wind clawed at the shutters, and every crack of thunder rolled through the floorboards like cannon fire. Rain lashed the windows, streaking the glass with silver rivulets. Emily stood at her bedroom window, lantern trembling in her hand, heart already hammering, because she knew what she would see. And there it was, the dress. Soaked through, clinging, tattered now and torn at the hem. Lightning flared across the garden, illuminating the fabric's ghastly detail. Mud, grass stains, and streaks of something darker, red, seeping into the folds. The storm wind tossed the lace, making it sway as though someone were wearing it, someone caught mid-step. Emily swallowed hard. She couldn't watch from behind glass anymore. Something compelled her, a mix of terror and defiance. She snatched her coat from the chair and pushed open the door, letting the storm swallow her whole. The rain struck her face like icy needles as she crossed the sodden grass. Her lantern flickered wildly, fighting against the gusts, and each flash of lightning carved monstrous shadows from the oak tree. The dress swayed just ahead, impossibly upright, as though draped over invisible shoulders. Emily's pulse surged. "Clara!" she whispered, though the storm drowned her voice. The lantern sputtered and went out. Darkness engulfed her. For a breathless moment, there was nothing, only the drum of rain and the howl of the storm. And then came the whisper. "You promised you'd wait." The words slithered through the dark, soft and mournful, close enough to stir the hairs at the back of Emily's neck. She froze, clutching the cold handle of the dead lantern, staring into the black. Lightning split the sky. And she saw it. The dress no longer hung limp, but moved. Its bodice filled, its sleeves stretched as though an unseen body wore it. The veil flared in the wind, framing the pale suggestion of a face that was there only when the lightning struck and gone again with the dark. Emily staggered back, mud sucking at her boots, but before she could run, the world tilted. She wasn't in her garden anymore. The storm was still there, but she stood on the banks of the river, lantern light strangely steady now, illuminating a scene unraveling before her eyes. Clara, alive, breathing, running, her soaked gown clinging to her legs as she stumbled down the muddy slope. Her bouquet, wilted and broken, fell from her hand. "Clara!" a voice shouted behind her. Not Thomas. A man followed, his figure blurred by rain and shadow, his steps heavy with rage. He caught her wrist, spun her, and for one terrible second, Emily saw his face. It wasn't Thomas. The eyes, fierce, furious, alive with something darker, burned into her. They were eyes she knew, though she had never wanted to imagine them in this place. Eyes she had looked into her whole life. Her father's eyes. Lightning turned the moment into a frozen photograph. Clara's face contorted in terror, the man's hand raised, the storm swirling around them. Then came the scream, sharp and raw, before Clara was shoved, tumbling backward into the churning water. A splash swallowed her cry. The vision shattered. Emily was back in the garden, rain pounding down, her breath ragged. The dress stood motionless again, dripping and red-streaked, as though mocking her with what she had seen. Emily staggered, gripping the oak for balance, her mind reeling. The whispers were gone. The storm roared louder, but inside Emily's head, there was only silence. A silence heavy with a truth she could never unsee. Her father had been there that night. The dress sagged against the oak's trunk as though the invisible bride had finally collapsed. Emily turned and fled, stumbling toward the house, every flash of lightning searing the image of her father's face chasing Clara through the rain. The truth had been buried for 20 years, but now it was clawing its way back, dressed in lace and blood. And Emily knew nothing in her life would ever be the same. The storm had passed, but the garden was a ruin. Branches lay across the grass, mud caked into the footprints Emily had left running back and forth, and the oak tree, the one that had borne the haunted dress, was split and smoking where lightning had struck. The air was heavy, charged with an energy that made her skin prickle, her heart thump like a drum. Emily's lantern flickered as she stepped cautiously into the wrecked garden, drawn toward the edge of the river where the final vision had played out in her mind. She shivered at the memory, Clara's terrified face, the violent shove, the water swallowing her whole, and the eyes, those impossibly familiar eyes. And then, in the shadows beneath the broken oak, she saw him. Her father, Edward Morgan. He stood there, silent, drenched from the storm, but not afraid, not startled. The red-streaked dress swayed beside him, hanging as if it waited for him. He looked older than usual in the dim light, his face taut, expression unreadable, eyes dark and cold. "Emily," he said, voice low but steady, carrying a weight she had never heard before. "You shouldn't have seen." Her legs felt weak, her chest tight. "Father, you were there, that night with Clara." Edward's lips pressed into a thin line. He did not deny it. He did not flinch. "Yes," he said finally, "I was there, and you will understand soon enough." Emily took a step back. "Why? Why would you—" His eyes flashed with a cruel clarity, and the truth hit her like a blade. Jealousy, obsession, a love twisted by years and bitterness. Thomas, he was supposed to be everything to her, but she looked at him differently. She wanted someone else, and that man, he wasn't worthy. I couldn't let her go to him, couldn't let her ruin what could have been mine, what could have been ours. Her blood ran cold. "Clara? Thomas? You killed them?" Edward's nod was slow, deliberate. "I did what had to be done. Thomas drowned because I made sure. Clara, she resisted. She ran. I followed. She fell into the river. She was too beautiful, too wild, and I could not let it go." Emily stumbled backward, horrified, her mind racing. The visions, the haunted dress, the whispers, all of it made sense now. The scratches in the oak, the initials on the dress, they were warnings she hadn't understood, messages from the past meant to be revealed to her alone. "Why tell me this now?" she whispered, voice shaking. Edward's eyes softened almost tenderly, though the menace never left his expression. "Because you had to see the truth. Because one day the past comes for all of us. I couldn't hide it forever, not from you. You deserved to know, even if it destroys everything you thought you knew." Emily's stomach twisted with disgust and fear. She realized the storm, the visions, the dress, they had all been drawing her here, guiding her toward this horrifying revelation. "You monster!" she screamed, tears stinging her eyes. Edward stepped closer, calm,
almost mournful. No, I loved her. I loved her too much, and I loved our family. I protected what was mine. Emily shook her head, unable to comprehend. They were innocent. You killed them because of jealousy. He looked away briefly, as if regretting nothing and everything at once. Then his gaze returned to hers, dark and unwavering. Suddenly, the wind whipped around them, tearing the soaked dress from the oak and sending it swirling like a phantom. Emily stumbled back, tripping over a root. The dress hovered in the air, twisting, almost alive, and she felt Clara's presence there, silent, accusing, vengeful. Her father lunged, but the dress moved first. It whipped around him like a living thing, wrapping tightly around his legs, tripping him, knocking him into the mud. He cursed, trying to pull free, but the more he struggled, the tighter it clung, soaked with rain and hints of blood that seemed to pulse like it had a heartbeat of its own. Emily scrambled backward, watching in stunned horror as the dress seemed to animate itself with a will of its own. The fabric flailed, pulled him to the edge of the riverbank, and with a final desperate cry, he slipped. His hands grasped for nothing but air. The water swallowed him whole, and silence fell abruptly. The storm had gone, leaving only the soft drip of rain from the broken oak. Emily sank to her knees, shaking uncontrollably, staring at the black river that had claimed him. The dress lay limp once more on the ground, soaked, torn, and still somehow heavy with presence. She realized then that Clara's spirit had found justice, however cruel, however delayed. And yet, the victory felt hollow. The man she had called father, the man who should have been her protector, was gone forever, but the horror of his deeds would never leave her. Emily stood slowly, drenched, exhausted, but resolute. The dress remained as it had always had, haunting, mysterious, a bridge between past and present. She knew she would never forget the night she learned the terrible truth. The man who killed both Clara and Thomas had been her own father, consumed by jealousy and obsession, and she had been powerless to stop him until the spirits themselves intervened. She turned away from the river, back toward the ruined garden and the shattered oak. The dress lay in the mud at her feet, silent now, but Emily knew its story was far from over, for it would forever haunt the edges of memory, whispering the consequences of human desire and betrayal. And as the first faint light of dawn broke across the sky, Emily understood something chilling. Some truths are too heavy to bear, yet they must be faced, no matter the cost. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe for more English stories.